What is the heaviest you're a big, strong dude, like in the gym.
Yes.
What's the heaviest you've lifted? We're rolling.
Okay, cool. Welcome back,
Cheers.
dude.
Welcome back.
You know what I love, man? This set right now. Reka did. I just want to give a shout out to Reka. Just did an amazing job. Our set designer. Look at this. But you know what's crazy, man? We're cheersing over this term, this word, which our whole series is based around Luso. And learning what we just learned, in the last couple shows about the Lusitanians and their just grit and willpower to fight the biggest empire in the world and gave them the biggest run for their money they ever had, the Roman Empire.
The Roman Empire, right.
Just gives such a new meaning to the term Luso and just persevering through trials and being, just forged out of steel and iron and grit and determination. This word now, Luso, means so much more to me hearing that story.
And the guy who was telling us about that, Paul Mattino, he's in the Ironbound district.
Oh, wow. That's funny. Jeez.
Isn't that wild, right?
Wild.
We were both like, what? I didn't know that story about the Lusitanians. And we really
it's crazy, man. And to face the Roman Empire, that's a true David and Goliath story again as well.
Think of like the movie 300.
Right. No, exactly.
That's the Lusitanians.
That's Lusitanians.
That's our Peter Francisco badass warrior Luso. Mm-hmm. Well, so where we ended the last show was The Patriot. I think, The Patriot, of course, Mel Gibson. That was a famous movie. And it's probably one of the classic or top American Revolution movies of all time. And so that movie begins in what we call, for the history buffs out there, the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution. It begins at Charleston being burned to the ground.
Right.
And so in The Patriot, you got... he's called the Swamp Fox, but I forget his name in real life. But the Swamp Fox, that kind of like fires him up. Kind of like the Peter Francisco moment in time of St. John's Church, that fires him up.
Yes.
Well, the Swamp Fox in The Patriot, that kind of gets him jazzed up, and he's like, I'm back at it, back into the battle. So, but in Peter Francisco's life, he was not there at Charleston, but what we see is that he was at the next major battle in the Southern Campaign, which was the Battle of Camden.
Okay.
And so Camden, you actually had it's a really wild battle because back then they would kind of strategically get into a spot like do I have the high ground over the British or so they would like move their troops and all that and get into a spot where they knew they're going to do battle, and then like next day battle So the Battle of Camden is really crazy is because they were like maneuvering into position, and what they didn't realize that they both were camped like within a half mile from each other. So literally in the middle of the night, battle breaks out because like they're right there. Before they could get onto the battlefield, so Peter Francisco is there at the Battle of Camden, but they like quickly are running out on the battle, trying. Of course, back then they would line up their guys. All right, get all in the line here. All right, fire. It was just a completely different.
Right.
Right. But here we have
nothing tactical about it.
Right, exactly. In our hands,
line up, let's fire. Let's do this. Yeah.
So of course, Peter Francisco in that engagement, he's like it's just a mad scramble. Everybody's trying to run out of the battlefield,
right?
And they're just getting routed by the British. And there's this very famous, iconic story of Peter Francisco trying to salvage or save a colonial cannon from getting from the British.
Right, which is crazy because this story is one of many tales that get told about Peter Francisco, but you're talking about this cannon story has prevailed over the years because it's shown up in multiple places. So including, which you'll talk about, but
which is the stamp. It's crazy that of all the stories about Peter Francisco, in 1976, bicentennial stamp comes out to kind of, remember our colonial or Revolutionary War heroes. And Peter Francisco is one of those stamps.
Yes, carrying the cannon.
And so here
the stamp is a picture of Peter Francisco carrying a cannon off the battlefield to save this cannon.
Right. Which is, again, crazy.
On a stamp that everyone used in the country.
Right. Now, in that engagement, actually, so he's militia. So we were talking about in the last episode that he joins up with the 10th Virginia Regiment. He actually fought for 3 years. And then we see as he goes home, but technically he doesn't really have a home.
Right.
So in real life, we see that he ends up moving in with another family, the Anderson family, and they have a daughter named Susanna. But we won't talk much about that. We'll just kind of leave that. You
got to leave that out.
You marinate on that one. You know what I'm saying? You about the same age girl, and they're like,
young boy, hormones raging.
Comes home from battle, big, strong, strapping, 6'6", 260 pounder. You know what I'm saying? And
so we'll leave that for later.
We'll leave that for later. Anyway. But then what we have is we know he goes back into battle. And he's militia this time. He's not with the 10th Virginia Regiment. He's militia here at the Battle of Camden. And we actually see that he saves a colonel. Colonel Mayo was his good friend. In real life, he actually saves his life. Colonel Mayo gives him some property later after the American Revolution and gives him a big dress sword, which that dress sword is in a museum in Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
But from the battlefield, they don't talk about Colonel, again, the most epic and iconic story is him lifting up this massive cannon on his shoulder.
To salvage that.
Which is crazy. So the speculation is that the cannon was like 1,100 pounds. Of course, we sit there and we think, how is that? Now, I'm just going to ask, what is the heaviest you're a big, strong dude, in the gym.
Yes.
What's the heaviest you've lifted?
I mean, the heaviest I've ever deadlifted in my life is 465.
465.
465, and that was for one rep. And that was just up to my waist. I mean, that's not...
For those that don't know what explain a deadlift.
Yeah, I mean, deadlift is loading a barbell up, and you're pulling it from the ground up to your waist. Basically, you're standing tall with the barbell in your hands. But you're not heaving it up onto your shoulder and walking off with it.
Right.
So the most I could do that with maybe a couple hundred pounds. 225, maybe. But a couple of steps. I'm not, and maybe on pavement in good shoes. I'm not walking off like a war-torn battlefield with mud and whatever else. So to think of him doing that, obviously adrenaline and all that's involved, but still, it's that's a major feat. This guy just must have been massive. And maybe, like you said, that was the whole assembly, the carriage for the thing with the wheels and everything that the cannon rode on. But nonetheless, I mean, if the cannon is even half of that, even a third of that, you're talking about a major feat of strength that just speaks to the enormous size that Peter Francisco was.
So when I produced my television documentary about Peter Francisco,
which is on the History Channel,
people can find on YouTube. You just Google the Peter Francisco story. But I had a medical doctor come on camera and talk about the adrenal gland. Mm-hmm. And when that kicks in, you can technically pick up 3 or 4 times more than what you normally could pick up. So 400 deadlift was 400 something?
Just 400 pounds.
400 pounds. Let's call it 400. So technically speaking, adrenal, in an emergency kicks in. Let's say a car rolled on top of your wife.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. You hear these stories, right? Where moms or dads or whatever have lifted cars up off of their children or in a car accident, just done these crazy things, which can definitely happen. I mean, like you said, the adrenal gland kicks in, and the human body is capable of amazing things,
extraordinary things.
But picking that up, picking a car up for a couple of seconds to slide someone out from out under is one thing. Picking a cannon up and walking with it and getting it out, that's something totally different.
And so that's the wild story about Peter Francisco with this cannon. He supposedly picks this thing up, carries it off the battlefield. Now, here's the funny thing is, I produced a television documentary with the History Channel 10 or so years ago, but a few years ago,
just 2 or 3 years
ago. 2 or 3 years ago, the History Channel they do a show called The Strongest Men of History. And they each episode, they pick a strong, badass man from worldwide history. And they take the 4 strongest men on the planet today to try and do these feats of strength, of the stories that were told. One of the episodes was all about Peter Francisco.
Right.
So they take the 4 strong men of the planet today, and they're like, well, let's see if we can do what Peter Francisco did. So it's crazy when you go watch these guys, try and pick up a massive cannon. And of course, so they're the ones on the show that are like, hey, it probably was not, there's just no way it was 1,100 pounds. The 1,100 pounds maybe was the wheel and the whole thing.
The carriage, everything that carried the cannon.
Right. And they said, so you can go watch the show again, but they say, the cannon on the 1,100 pound, whole manifold, the whole thing, the cannon itself was about 350 pounds. So then, of course, the thing was, well, can you just pick up a 350 pounder?
Right.
Man, these are the 4 strongest guys on the planet. And
just struggling. Just one guy did it, right?
But one guy did it, and Brian Shaw, he's actually a 4-time world strongman.
Yeah.
And so here, we'll cut Tim's got it queued up. We'll cut to that shot.
I didn't come all the way to Virginia to fail at Peter Francisco's biggest feat of strength. Come on, B! Come on, Brian. Don't you stop, Brian. Come on. Come on.
It's up. It's up.
Yes! Come on, march it, B. Go. Come on, go. Get it, Brian. Come on, Brian. Don't you stop, Brian. Come on. There you are. 10 yards, Brian. Come on, 10 yards. Yes! Oh. That was bad.
So here you
I mean, one guy, and he's a 4-time world strongman today. With all of the help that people get today. And then you flash back to Peter Francisco's day, 1700s, and it's amazing, man.
It's amazing.
It's super cool.
I mean, the fact is, look, there were eyewitness accounts of him picking up a cannon.
It was on a damn stamp.
Right, it's on a damn stamp. The U.S. Postage Day,
Right.
So you just try and figure, no matter how big the cannon was, it wasn't 1,100 pounds, we know that, but whatever size the damn thing was, it's just crazy what he accomplished.
It's crazy. Cannon, dude. Yeah.
So then from Camden, for the history nerds out there, we actually see that Southern campaign of the American Revolution. We see the next battles are in the Charlotte area. There's the Battle of Cowpens, and there was speculation whether he was there or not. In the movie, that's going to be in the series, Luso, the series. That's going to be an epic battle. Peter Francisco's there. But then we see a little bit further the Battle of Guilford Courthouse.
Right.
And that is another epic moment in Peter Francisco's life.
Yes. Huge.
Because he's such a big dude. He's he's complaining the swords are too small.
Right. Which we'll get to. So we won't talk. We'll just leave it with that. Yeah.
The swords are too small for Peter Francisco. He's like, I think the story was, truthfully, he would, the records say that he was like, the swords are like a toothpick. Like if come on, really give me a little bit bigger than a toothpick, sword.
Right.
So we'll leave it at that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. But that's Guilford Courthouse, which, again, for the history nerds, that's like in Greensboro. Greensboro, by the way, the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, is named after General Greene from that battle.
Right.
So that, in terms of American history. But then we see that Peter Francisco continues on, and he doesn't fight in the last battle of the American Revolution, but he was there, which is the Battle of Yorktown. So there was some other stuff that happened in there, which we won't talk too much about, but Tarleton, the famous Colonel Tarleton from the British Army, somewhere in there, he ends up being captured by his men. And so, you have to watch the series.
That's right. Got to stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So there you have it. I mean, that's like, Peter Francisco, and people are always asking, well, what did he do? Like, why do we have these monuments?
Right.
And
which there's obviously, you didn't mention, a huge monument in Greensboro.
Yep.
At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, which you can go visit today. Is that the one with the plaque from George Washington?
Yeah, so the plaque, the plaque from George Washington is on the monument up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
This plaque actually says that, which Tim, you can put it up on screen here, but I forget exactly the wording, but that Peter Francisco in this battle rendered himself likely the most famous private soldier with his broadsword.
That's right.
So, again, massive broadsword in this engagement. So, Yeah, so Tim can put that up on screen.
Right.
And you and I have been there, so we'll put that out there on
Oh, yeah.
social media.
Love it.
And then if you go inside the museum, I filmed a lot of the documentary with the History Channel there. So inside the museum, you have a whole display case of Peter Francisco's stuff and a shoe that he wore, blah, blah, blah. So all kinds of different artifacts and whatnot of Peter Francisco's legacy.
Yeah, very cool.
But then people always ask, well, then after the war, then what?
Yes. Then what?
Then what? Well, stay tuned to the next
tuned.
episode, and we'll tell you more about that.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out Luso the Journey. If you are interested in more of the journey, consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, you want to check out the entire Luso the Journey playlist as we unpack more of our journey and we talk to some amazing people who've joined us along the way.